Grillers is a special event night wave that has been in SalmonRun since the very beginning. It's a tricky wave that needs a lot of coordination, which can be really hard in Freelance. In this two-part guide, I'll be explaining the fundamentals of the wave and helping you succeed when the Salmonids force you to play this game with them. The first part will go over the fundamentals, weapon roles, and the second video will go over maps, specials, strats, quota management, and of course, surviving. These videos will be explicitly discussing this wave within the context of Freelance. There will be some transferable knowledge that can help in squads, but please recognise that I will not be discussing overfishing. I will, however, be leaving information in the description with forward links should you want to delve into that area some more. If you like this video or find it helpful, please consider subscribing. Fundamentals. The griller, also known as grillers, is a known occurrence in SalmonRun, which is another way of saying it's a night wave or an event wave. This mode can be played once you hit the part-timer rank and will never occur on low tide, except during Big Run. During this round there are only two enemies, grillers and small fry. When the wave starts, Mr. Grizz gives you a warning on the screen about it being grillers. At the beginning of the wave, there will only be one griller at a time. At around 87 seconds left, Mr. Grizz will notify you that this is changing and it will increase to 2 grillers, which is the maximum amount of griller spawns at any one time. Small fry are infinite, if speaking in broad terms. There are maximum caps on the amount of enemies that can appear on screen at any one time, but I don't foresee this being something you can manipulate in Freelance very easily, so for simplicity's sake, expect to see continuous small fry spawning in as long as the grillers are active. Grillers are giant armoured enemies that resemble barbecue grills. They have, for the most part, an impenetrable green outer shell that prevents any damage being inflicted on it. There are certain ways to bypass the restrictions that the griller's armoured outer body impose. Certain weapons and specials can pierce through the body of the grillers and can cause damage. I'll speak about these in their respective chapters and discuss the ways in which these can change the dynamic of the wave, but for the most part, the grillers can only be damaged by attacking their weak spot, the exposed tail. The exposed tail is on the top of the griller, which overall resembles a barbecue grill cover. The exposed tail is at the back of the griller and needs 400 damage to be stunned. Once stunned, more weak points become available to be shot at the top of the griller. Overall, the grillers have 2,200 total health, and this never changes. The 400 damage dealt to stun the griller is inclusive of this 2,200 total, meaning that after stunning a griller once, you then need to hit it for 1,800 damage to fully defeat it. Once defeated, the griller gives 5 golden eggs. This used to be 3 golden eggs in the early days of Splatoon 2, but it was soon changed. They always give 5 eggs, this doesn't change. The only way to spawn more grillers is to defeat the ones currently on screen. After defeating a griller, the next one will spawn approximately 3 to 4 seconds later. Grillers have set spawn points on each map. I will go over these in their respective sections, but they are set points and they do not change. What does change, however, is which spawn point a griller will spawn from. This is, for the most part, RNG. In scenario codes, they will always follow the same pattern. There is a conversation to be had about sequence breaking grillers and defeating them quicker to change spawn points, but I don't think this is the right video for it. Suffice it to say that if you defeat a griller quickly, it may potentially change the spawn point that the next griller will spawn from. In a regular game, you won't notice this, but in extra work or scenario codes, this can be exploited. Grillers don't regenerate health. What this means is that whatever damage is dealt on the enemy is stored. Once stunned, the griller will remain immobile with all the weak spots exposed for 5 seconds. If, after 5 seconds, the griller has not been defeated, it will then restart moving towards the targeted player. However, all the damage dealt to the griller up until this point remains. So for example, if you had stunned it and then dealt a total of 2,000 damage, it means that you only need to hit for 200 more to destroy it, whether it's stunned or not. This remains until the griller is defeated. If the health remaining is more than 400, then the griller will get stunned again after that 400 threshold is met. Grillers can be hit when they're moving, they don't necessarily need to be stunned. When two Grellas meet, one of them will often be pushed down, rendering it unable to move forward for a brief period, which allows the other Grella to move past it. After this, both Grellas will move towards their respective targets. Again, they can be damaged at any point in their cycle, just as long as the damage is inflicted on their weak spot. Grellas have set ways in which they move. They cannot jump or climb walls, and they cannot move on movable platforms. They will use the shortest route to the targeted player. This means that you can move around maps in certain ways to lure them to certain positions. The Grella, when chasing its target, will move towards them in strict straight lines, meaning the exposed tail is at the back. When the Grella wants to change direction, it spins itself around, which will cause the exposed tail to move position. This can be helpful on maps that have ledges and higher platforms, which I will discuss in more depth in the chapter titled Maps. What's important to note is how the Grella moves around maps. The speed of the Grella changes depending on the hazard, being quite slow in lower hazard lobbies and dramatically increasing when you climb the ranks. This may cause you to be caught off guard. You cannot outrun them, regardless of which weapon you're carrying. Because of the speed at which they move during hazard level max, they can sometimes go over ledges and platforms when you would expect them not to. It's good to be aware that this can happen sometimes. For clarity, in all of these videos, I will use the term aggro, and this just means who has the attention of the enemy. So if the Grella is aggro to me, that means the Grella is chasing me. You can tell who has the aggro on them by the red laser that is tracked to them. This aggro, once locked to a target, does not change. The only way to remove aggro from a player is by defeating the Grella, or if you are splatted. There are two exceptions to this. I'll discuss this at the end of this chapter, but for all intents and purposes, once you are tracked by a Grella, you should assume and play around the fact that it is on you until it is defeated. Each player can have one or two Grellas aggroed to them. If all players are active, it is random and decided when the Grellas spawn in. If there are two players remaining, both Grellas will be aggroed to them, either one each or both on one player. If there is only one player active, they will have the aggro of both Grellas. Grellas take you down in one touch. There is simply no room to maneuver around their damage output. If you touch them, you're splattered. They deal 500 damage at the point of contact. With the exception of the Kraken Royale, there is no way to survive being touched by a Grella. With this in mind, the game teaches you to be scared of the Grellas if you're targeted. But for this part, I just want to mention that if you're aggroed, the best thing you can do is figure out where your teammates are stood and bring the Grella to them so that they can stun it for you. It's incredibly difficult on most maps to be the person aggroed and be the person attempting to stun it. It depends on a lot of things, and often it's not in your best interest to put yourself at great risk doing this. Once it's stunned, you can then help your teammates defeat the Grella or manage the small fry. Small fry are the other part of the wave that will cause you grief. You can argue in certain ways the small fry are actually harder to manage than the Grellas themselves. This is because they will swarm the closest player and they are relentless. If uncontrolled, they will continue to spawn and they will block movement, which can render you ineffective at minimum but splattered at worst. Small fry spawn from active Grellas and they have the same stats as they do in regular waves. They have 40 HP and they deal 25 damage to you on contact. When one small fry hits you, you'll be fine, but when 10 of them all hit you at the same time, you'll go down immediately. Small fry attack fast, and they have no maximum height that they can jump to if the player they're targeting is up high, which is why wall clinging isn't 100% safe. They can go down ledges and can continue to chase players on movable platforms. The best way to manage small fry is to destroy the Grella that spawns them. Finally, the two exceptions to the rule about being targeted by the Grellas. The first is that ending an inkjet special will force the Grella to target someone else. This aggro changes when the inkjet finishes and not when it is activated or being used. I'll talk more about this during the inkjet special section, but it is worth knowing that when a player uses the inkjet, the aggro will shift shortly thereafter. The other exception to the rule about de-aggroing Grellas off of you is only doable on two maps currently, Marina's Bay and Salmon and Smokeyard. The lifts or elevators or movable platforms, whatever you call them, serve as something of a check for the Grellas and the way in which they can track players. If you are being targeted and you pass over one or you step on one of these movable platforms, the Grella will then target another random player. This is likely set up in a way that prevents the enemies from serious desync or glitchy behavior or potentially falling into the water. So because this check exists, it works as a way to protect you and allows you to manipulate the behavior of the Grellas. Small fry are unaffected by these platforms and will continue to behave in their usual way. I will will talk about the ramifications and strategies around using these movable platforms in their respective chapters, so I won't talk too much about the reason why you would want to do it here, but I think on these two maps, Grillers can be played quite differently, and it's good to be aware of it, especially if you're playing in Freelance. Depending on the skill of the lobby, your teammates may not be aware that aggro can be shifted, and this also includes them shifting the aggro to you. It's therefore important to be aware of the consequences of doing this. Weapon roles. This section will discuss generic weapon roles for each class of weapons. I won't go into too much depth for every single weapon, this is mostly covered in my individual weapon guides, but I will mention notable exceptions to classes and discuss weapons that are considered difficult or unusual. Before I discuss weapons in particular, of note to mention are splat bombs. As every player will have access to these, it's important to know how to get the most out of them. The Griller's outer body functions in the same way as slamming lids and steel eels bodies. What I mean by this is that splat bombs explode immediately upon impact instead of their usual delayed detonation. They have a relatively large AoE and can hit multiple hitboxes on different enemies. These can be used to help stun and defeat Grillers and can be used to help defeat small fry. If you have a weapon that gets a lot of use from bombs, for example weapons that are lightweight, ink efficient, have no AoE or have short range, then it is crucial to consider bombs as part of your strategy and part of your overall DPS where you can. If you have a weapon that sees little to no benefit from bombs, think of blasters, Brellas and rollers, then consider using them sparingly and when you have the safety to recover ink. Splat bombs deal 180 damage at maximum. Shooters. Shooters are, in most ways, the easiest and simplest weapon class in the game. However, not all of them fall within this definition, and so classifying all shooters within a similar role is actually quite tricky. There are stark differences between the Junior and the 96 gal, for example. I wouldn't expect these weapons to be used in similar ways. However, what you can say is that given that they're automatic weapons, you'll have an easier time shooting, moving, and recovering ink compared to pretty much every other class of weapon. It's important to recognise as a shooter you'll often be the most adaptable. For what it's worth, all shooters are adaptable, and so I want to exercise caution with specific weapon roles. In almost all scenarios during Grillers, you'll be forced to adapt to play around the team you're in, so I want to start off this section with mentioning that if you have a shooter, please remember that you have more freedom, more flexibility, and you're probably the most self-sufficient weapon in the comp. It's wise to recognise what is missing from your comp and then work towards attempting to fulfill it. Being a shooter during Grillers is simultaneously easy and hard. The weapons are often quite straightforward to use, but if you don't maximise them or their ability to support a team, you may fall short of getting the most out of them. The Junior, the NZAP, the Aerospray, the Splash and the Sploosh are all lightweight weapons. This means they move faster than all other groups of weapons, both swimming and running. They also often have better ink efficiency, being able to recover ink quicker compared to other weapons. What this translates to is usually being the best player on the team to paint for everybody, but to also throw bombs and golden eggs. With these weapons, it's in your best interest to not remain still. You should be fluid with your positioning and you should really take advantage of the freedoms that you have. You can be everywhere, you can paint everything, and you can throw eggs into the basket easier than most other weapons. In addition, you are not punished as harshly as other weapons for needing to relocate for safety if you're under pressure. Think about how quick it is to stop shooting and to start moving. When I have these weapons, I try not to focus on the damage that I may lack. The important thing with these weapons is the support that they can provide. The Sploosh is an outlier here because whilst I would certainly recommend utilising its lightweight status and its ability to be flexible, it also has a far higher DPS than most other weapons, and so it's important to take more of a slayer role than a support role. I'll get back to this weapon in a minute, but for all the others I've mentioned, you'll focus on support most of the time, and this includes general support such as paint and focusing on objective, but also damage support, especially with small fry. A good measure of how much you're doing is by how empty your ink tank is, which sounds counterintuitive, but if you constantly have a full ink tank with these weapons, then it means you're not using it enough. Paint more, run more, throw more eggs and bombs, and certainly keep an eye out for your teammates who may need protecting or assistance. The 52 gal and the Splatshot are similar to the previous group, but they are middleweight shooters, meaning they aren't as fast with their mobility and ink recovery. However, they both have better single shot damage, meaning they have better utility with fighting rather than just strictly supporting. However, Both of these weapons are excellent and are very versatile within squads. There really isn't anything they can't do, and they are able to bend to the needs of their team really well. They can be played much like the previously mentioned shooters, or they can focus more on damage. There really isn't a correct way to use these two. It's just really important to recognise what is missing from your comp and to fill in that gap. The Splattershot Pro, the Nova and the Jet Squelcher have excellent range, however they have somewhat middling DPS and slower fire rates. I would say with these weapons you really don't want to use splat bombs because their ink tanks aren't really great for it. The way to play these weapons is to utilise their range over everything else. They're very good for proactively stunning Grillers and helping with overall damage on them. Given their range, they can take defensive positions on maps, however I wouldn't recommend letting Grillers and small fry get too close. Often with these weapons you will struggle when you don't clear enemies fast enough. The Nova especially will struggle more than the other two as it is one of the weakest weapons in the game. However, it does have a slightly better fire rate and a better ink tank to make up for this. They are mostly supportive slayers that can help with paint and objective, but I would personally recommend abusing their ability to stun from safe positions and to support teammates where possible. The Squeezer, H3 and L3 are all semi-automatic shooters. What this means is that they're annoying. No, I mean truthfully it means you're a bit more vulnerable with positioning and mobility. However, all three of them have good range and somewhat good DPS. The Squeezer is the weakest of the bunch, but it has a nice ability to increase its range with tap shots, which can help a lot with stunning. In its regular firing mode, it's good for painting and general support with damage. The L3 is the same, but with slightly better speed and better paint. Both of these can be flexible with what they need to do, but they may fall short if all the damage is dependent on them. The H3 is slower and often you'll feel encumbered by its slowness before, during and after firing. Given its higher damage output, it can deal 210 damage if all three of the shots hit the same target. You'll want to focus more on fighting than supporting. It can stun a Griller surprisingly quickly compared to most other shooters, and its overall ability to damage the Grillers is quite good. It will just struggle against hordes of small fry and having to relocate too much. To offset this, try and stun Grillers earlier if you can. The 96 Gal is the strongest shooter per individual shot, however its power is negated by its slow mobility, slow fire rate and roulette-like aim. It does however have great range, and because it's a shooter it does have the ability to stop and start quite quickly and move away from danger with little repercussions. With the 96 Gal, your main job is much like a Splatling or a Charger. You need to stun. At 85 damage per shot, you need just 5 shots to fully stun the Griller. However, in practice you'll likely have help from your team, so it'll often feel quicker than this. Use your range where you can and try to stun sooner rather than later. Oftentimes with the 96 Gal, you tend to struggle if too many enemies are too close and closing in on you. Give yourself some space and time and stun earlier. Once stunned, you should unload as much damage onto the Griller as you can. Try not to focus too much on supporting. You need to focus on slaying with this weapon. It really struggles to do anything else. The Sploosh falls into an entirely individual role within its class. It is objectively one of the strongest weapons in the game, but what makes it so unique and powerful is that it almost has no downsides. Often with powerful weapons, they have a gimmick or they have a really obvious drawback. For the Sploosh, I mean, you could argue that its range is its drawback, but in SalmonRun, you hardly notice this, especially if you're able to capitalize off of platforms and using height. The Sploosh is an overpowered slaying machine that can carry all waves in SalmonRun practically on its own, and Grillers is no different. When I have the Sploosh, I go wild. I defeat every Griller I can get close to. It's entirely possible to one-cycle a Griller on your own with the Sploosh, and not many weapons are capable of doing this. Simultaneously, due to the large shots that the Sploosh fires, you can easily defeat small fry, meaning that you can protect yourself quite easily. In addition to all of this, its lightweight status means that it can provide paint for itself, has freedom to move without punishment, and it has the ability to support its teammates. It's also really easy to incorporate bombs into your play, and you're arguably a great player to also throw and run eggs too. Sploosh in Grillers is a win con. Choosing to not utilise its insanely high DPS and being too supportive is not the way to use it. You are automatically given a free pass to mow down everything in your way. Dualies. Dualies are very similar to shooters in the sense that they are easy to use, they have a lot of freedoms that other classes don't, and they vary quite dramatically between each other. For all intents and purposes, I use Dualies much like I use shooters. It just very much depends on what is needed in the moment. Dodge rolling either gives you more mobility, a better fire rate, or more damage. However, it comes with the risk of using more ink, being left stationary and being vulnerable to damage, either by hundreds of small fry or by the fast moving Grellas. During Grellas, unless the Dualie needs a boost to its damage or its fire rate, I personally use dodge rolling more defensively, meaning I dodge roll to escape and to move more freely. This is just personal preference, but in Freelance I often prefer to play a bit more safer, especially on maps that have limited space or water surrounding them. This is entirely a choice that is neither right or wrong, but I just prefer to have more ink and take less risks where possible. In addition, Dualies are often the better weapons to flex to whatever roles are missing and to help with supported tasks, such as paint, small fry control and objective. The Tetras and the Squelchers are considered the two weaker Dualies, primarily because of their lower DPS. They both struggle with low damage, high ink usage when dodge rolling repeatedly, and somewhat sluggish fire. So you'll find that the most that you can do with these two in most scenarios is support, either with damage or with objective. I'd recommend stunning Grellas earlier to help offset the potential risks of being overwhelmed, and to keep an eye on teammates who may have stronger weapons. They may just need you to support them with paint or small fry. The Glugers and the Dowsers are both incredibly technical weapons that are, on the surface, quite difficult to use, but with practice and patience have huge payoffs, primarily from a DPS perspective. I won't go into the technicalities with these weapons here, it will just take too long. Besides, I have weapon guides for both of these. But in terms of role, you'll want to focus on slaying, as there is little use in supporting with these two. They both have a great ability to stun and defeat Grellas with ease once you get the hang of how they work. You kind of just need to be strict with your ink usage and be careful about where you position yourself on a map, dodge rolling included. Oftentimes you will benefit from quickly stunning so that you can find space to move and reduce small fry interference. You will struggle to maximize both of these weapons if small fry are left uncontrolled. The Splat Dualies and the Dapples are the two most versatile Dualies to get, and like I mentioned with the shooters, they can be used in wildly different ways. It just depends on what you're paired with. Realistically speaking, they both fit into any comp and they can be used either to fight or to support. However, I will say that with the Dapples specifically, you'll want to fight more than support, much the same way that you would use the Sploosh. They have high DPS and the only drawback is they're somewhat lacking range. However, again, you can negate this when positioned well. Both of these weapons benefit from an increase in fire rate when dodge rolling, and don't have substantial end lag after doing so you may find dodge rolling easier and more productive. They also have great ink tanks that feel endless, and they both recover ink really quickly. They can either focus on supporting to defeat the Grellas, or managing small fry and being more fluid with positioning. Just don't forget how powerful the Dapples are. I don't want to undersell them. If all you focus on is slaying Grellas throughout a wave, then it serves a great purpose. However, it's good to recognise the freedoms that the Dapples have compared to other powerful weapons, and again, like the Sploosh, you aren't limited in ways that other powerful weapons are, so don't forget your ability to do everything else really well. Sloshers. Sloshers work exceptionally well on Grellas because of their ability to fling their shots over the Grella and hit the exposed tail without needing to wait for it to turn around. Some Sloshers find this easier than others, but they all hold the unique ability to hit the exposed tail from unconventional angles. All Sloshers have varying levels of AoE, meaning that they can hit the Grella and small fry with the same slosh. It's really important to remember this and should be something you try to do with all of them. The Slosher, the Sloshing Machine and the Tri-Slosher all have varying abilities to fling their shots up and over obstacles. Even though the differences between these three weapons are worth discussing, for the sake of brevity, they function quite similar during Grellas. What I mean by this is that all three of them benefit from arcing shots up high and over the body of the Grellas to try and quickly get to the exposed tail. The Tri-Slosher struggles more because of range, so on maps where you can use height, you should factor this in. However, it's an excellent weapon for small fry management and being able to relocate around maps with speed. It is the only lightweight slosher, so it can be used more supportively if you're paired with weapons with better damage. The Slosher and the Sloshing Machine have an easier time with stunning Grellas as they have better range but also higher damage. Use both of these with their respective AoE spread to help stun Grellas quickly. The Bloblubber and Dreadringer have quite different ways of flinging their shots, but for the sake of Grellas, again, I find that they're quite similar in how they function, with really the only difference being that the Dread outperforms the blob in most ways. They both have considerably high DPS and so should focus on damaging the Grillers as much as they can. The Dread should utilise its exceptional AoE and spread damage, much the same as the other Sloshers. The blob is an outlier because of its unique projectiles, so whilst aiming and arcing might be a little bit harder, it's still really effective at putting damage into single targets. The Dread is better at painting and managing small fry. Arguably, I think the Dread is the best Slosher currently in the game due to several factors, so when given this weapon, you should focus on slaying and unloading as much DPS into the Grillers as possible. Small fry, whilst easy to manage, should be mostly an afterthought for these weapons, as the power they have is almost wasted if not aiming at the Grillers. The gSlosher is probably one of the hardest weapons to be given during Grillers. It's slow, requires strong knowledge of positioning and map layouts, and doesn't have the same sloshing projectiles as the other Sloshers. It is quite unique in how it functions and subsequently requires a lot of practice and patience. Ideally, you want to help with stunning the Grillers. Your range and ability to arc Sloshers helps with this. If the Grillers are left unstunned, you will struggle a lot because you'll be forced to move. Proactivity is the best when you're given a weapon like this, and you should focus on contributing to stunning and damaging the Grillers as much as you can. Because you're a heavyweight weapon, you move slower and you take longer to recover ink, so throwing eggs and bombs will limit how much damage you can inflict on the Grillers, and you may struggle to protect yourself from small fry. The gSlosher pierces and has a large AoE, which does make it great for keeping small fry in check. Blasters. Blasters have similar properties to Sloshers. They have excellent AoE and the ability to hit enemies from unconventional angles. The main difference is that blasters tend to be stronger on the single shot damage, but are also a bit harder in terms of ink management and movement. You'll be punished for overextending, and you don't really have the ability to paint well. However, when utilised well, blasters are a fantastic addition to any comp for Grillers. Both the Rapid and the Rapid Pro struggle in Grillers. Their mechanisms of attack don't really suit how the Grillers take damage. If you're given these weapons, you'll want to play relatively safe, as they will struggle if they're overwhelmed. Use their long range and somewhat decent AoE to attempt to stun Grillers. With help from teammates, this can be done quickly, and you can then support with cumulative damage on the Grillers. Avoid letting small fry overrun the area. You'll struggle to clear them quickly enough with either of these weapons. Be proactive and concentrate on damaging the Grillers and small fry as soon as you can. The Clash Blaster is one of my favourite weapons in the game because for what it lacks in damage, it makes up for in amazing AoE and shot spam. For Grillers, it can play extremely risky, being able to chase Grillers and position itself up close to ensure that every shot directly hits the Griller, with the explosive radius picking up the small fry. When done well, the Clash Blaster is a self-sufficient weapon that can make the wave feel easier. It's important to recognise that you're not really suited for painting or supporting from a perspective of paint or eggs. Ideally, you want to focus on damaging, even if only supportively. You're better at damaging the Grillers when it's stunned, as you can focus on them without needing to move. Basically, like all other blasters, you're a fighter first and foremost, so concentrate on clearing the area before doing anything else. The Blaster, the Luna, the Range Blaster and the S-Blast all perform relatively similar during Grillers. Though they have notable differences such as their range and their power, they all fulfill a similar role during the wave, which is fighting. Blasters don't perform well in any other capacity, so in most comps, if you're given one of these weapons, you'll likely be one of the better players to apply damage. Blasters don't have good paint, they have quite punishing ink tanks, and they all have variable end lag. Being aware of all of these restrictions means that you can play around them. You can't make blasters play the same as other weapons. You need to recognise that they are very good at certain things and certain things only. For all of these blasters, you should fight, and you should always lean towards being the player who stuns and uses AoE as much as possible. All of these blasters do 200 damage or more, meaning at minimum they only need 2 direct hits to stun a Griller, which is a lot better than almost every other weapon in the game. The Luna has less range but makes up for it with a wider AoE and a better ink tank. The S-Blast has the unique ability to switch between long range and short range, giving it incredible versatility in how it wants to attack the Grillers. The Blaster and the Range Blaster have consistent and reliable shots, however benefit from being proactive and reducing the chances of being overwhelmed. All of these weapons can hit small fry when they attack the Grillers. Just make sure you don't let 100 small fry chase you down. Rollers. This class of weapons is probably the hardest class to be given during Brellas. Much like a lot of other situations in SalmonRun, rollers struggle against certain bosses. They have limitations against grillers because they are best used when they are able to crush enemies, and the grillers' hitboxes don't really allow this. I would say with the exception of the dynamo, all rollers should focus on small fry because oftentimes there are better weapons in the comp for the grillers themselves. Small fry management is really important because it not only keeps you safe, it keeps your teammates safe and gives them that space to focus on the grillers. The reduction of small fry at the basket area means you can be more productive in terms of egg depositing and luring grillers. For your weaker rollers, such as Carbon, Splat Roller and Big Swig, you'll really want to focus on supporting the team that you're with rather than being a slayer. These weapons don't have the best damage or ink tanks to pull this off. They simply benefit more from helping with small fry, repainting routes after the enemies have been cleared, and assisting with the objective. Now I know in Freelance it won't always be this way, and you will have to step up if your teammates are struggling to stun. With these weapons, it's good to be aware of their limitations, but you can make them work. Utilize ledges wherever you can to help with hitting the hitboxes on the grillers. Use vertical flicks to assist with stunning where possible, and if all else fails, use your specials. The Flingser and the Dynamo can be used a bit more aggressively as they both have vertical flick damage of 300. The trouble is you're often slower and a bit more vulnerable when doing so it can become a bit tricky to do this. Depending on the map you're on, you can find safer places to stand and you can work around walls and ledges to remain safe. Because of their wide swings, you can find value in horizontal flicks, especially with the Dynamo because it can use its AoE to hit the exposed tail. But for both of these weapons, you're better off with vertical flicks. However, if you can match the height of the griller, then you can actually roll them. Spawning grounds and gone fishing both allow you to do this. It's easier to do it when they're stunned. If all else fails, concentrate on small fry cleanup just like you would do with the other rollers, but it's important not to forget the damage both of these rollers can put out, especially when the grillers are stunned. Splatlings. This class is probably one of the hardest to work with during grillers just because you're often held back by charge times. This makes you feel vulnerable, and if you're forced to change positions often, you'll likely end up losing the charge and tap shotting, which is kind of useless in most situations. Bombs are also broadly useless, and you'll find it hard to balance egg throwing with a harsh ink tank. In most situations, you'll find yourself struggling if you are not proficient with the weapons. The Hydra is probably the biggest culprit of this, but it does pack the hardest punch. It is one of the most powerful weapons in the game and can one-cycle a griller. That is, with one charge, it can deal over 2,200 damage. It has a DPS of 900, which is the highest of every weapon in the game. So when given this weapon, you want to slay grillers and slay grillers only. Every moment of downtime should be used recovering ink, charging your weapon, and repositioning yourself to stay active. Using the Hydra any other way will ensure two things. Firstly, you'll hate it, and secondly, your team will hate you. When you have a weapon as powerful as the Hydra, you want to focus on destroying grillers, or at the very least, damaging them enough so that your teammates can finish them off. There is zero room for flexibility with a weapon like Hydra. Your team should cover the rest, which is egg running and small fry control. Full charges are recommended as the Hydra gets a damage buff when fully charged. Partial charges should only be used when you need to survive, but if you play well enough, then you will find the time to fully charge in between spawns. Most maps have safe places you can stand. If your teammate has a Hydra, ensure their feet are painted, protect them from small fry, and try to lure the grillers so that their weak spot is exposed to get the quick stun and defeat. The rest of the Splatlings are all different levels of Hydra light, and what I mean by this is that whilst they don't have the power that the Hydra does, they should still focus primarily on stunning and slaying. Depending on which one you're given, you'll have a bit more flexibility in what you can do. The mini Splatling and the Nautilus have more flexibility in their positioning and their ability to support. They have faster charges and their ink usage isn't as high. Their range is also shorter compared to the rest of the class, so will involve you needing to get closer to the enemies to fully utilise their strengths. Again, you want to focus on damaging the grillers as much as you can, even if you're not the person to stun it. The Heavy Edit and the Ballpoint are all slightly more restrictive than the previous two and are a bit more similar to the Hydra. You have range, power, and certain buffs to some of the weapons when fully charged that make slaying grillers exceptionally easy. But the downside is that you're slower, you're more vulnerable to small fry, and any time spent using the weapon inefficiently will likely see you start losing pace. Much like the Hydra, you should focus on damaging the Grillers and using their range to help stun as early as possible. Oftentimes with weapons that have slowness or huge drawbacks, you'll want to be proactive with damaging and defeating enemies. As a Splatling, you're useless if you can't fully charge your weapon, and you can't reliably get your teammates to help you with this in Freelance. So to prevent you losing control, you should think about how you can get the most out of your weapon whilst acknowledging the drawbacks. Splatanas. Splatanas are, shot for shot, one of the strongest classes of weapons introduced to Splatoon 3. All three of them are extremely powerful with very minor setbacks. I often wonder how these weapons were put into the game seemingly without any real thought about how powerful they are, especially when you compare them to other classes. They are, without a doubt, weapons that need to focus on stunning and defeating Grillers. Though the Wiper is the weakest of the bunch, it has amazing mobility, efficient ink, and still packs a punch with a crit slash of 325. So whilst you don't stun it in one hit, you deal over 3/4 of the damage needed, which gives your team safety to stun it. The Wiper is very effective playing a more supportive role just because of its ability to run around the map with ease and flex between other roles. I don't want to diminish the strengths of this weapon, but I do find a lot more value personally in being flexible with my position, being an excellent egg runner and helping out with small fry management and paint. However, the good thing about the Wiper is that you can easily take more of a slayer role if your team is struggling. Aim to get level with the Griller's exposed tail to crit slash it. For both the Decavitator and the Stamper, you want to focus on almost exclusively stunning the Grillers. Both of these weapons are insanely overpowered in my opinion. They were made to fight. The Stamper has a crit slash of 400 and the Decav has a crit slash of 450. You can argue semantics over which one is better, but for Grillers they both have the ability to one-hit stun it and then practically single-handedly defeat them. You should work almost exclusively around the new spawns coming in and position yourself in the best place to ensure you hit those crit slashes. The crit slashes require you to be up close, but there may be times where you have to back off, so the long-range vertical slashes work well, giving you range and space to protect yourself. The Stamper needs 3 vertical slashes to stun it, but the Decav only needs 2. They are both extremely self-sufficient, powerful weapons, so you really should do your best to stay alive and inflict as much damage on the Grillers as you possibly can. Take time in between spawns to regenerate your ink tank and look for the new incoming spawns. Throwing eggs or bombs is simply wasting your ink tank doing tasks that your teammates can do. Protect yourself, but don't waste time on anything other than beating up the Grillers. Brellas. Brellas are one of my favourite classes of weapons because of how fun and unique they are to play. Their shotgun-like firing paired with protective canopies allows you to do a bit of everything, which ultimately sees you becoming more productive. The Grillers immediately shred all canopies, so it's important to be aware that they will not protect you if a Griller touches you. The undercover Brella's shield remains in place, the only Brella to do this, so you can afford to run up towards stun Grillers and ensure you take down any newly spawning small fry. The small fry will be defeated on contact with the canopy, so the firing can be aimed at the stunned Griller. The undercover Brella is the weakest Brella shot for shot, so you may find it more suited to a supportive role, especially when you consider its lightweight status and ability to move around the map with ease. It's great at painting, great at running eggs, and great at cleaning up after the Grillers have been defeated. The Splat Brella and the Recycle Brella are both excellent weapons to be given during Grillers because they are proficient slayers with very few drawbacks. The Splat Brella needs 3 hits to stun, but the Recycled needs only 2. I would focus on damaging the Grillers exclusively with these weapons and then using the canopies to protect yourself from small fry. The Splat Brella has a better time flashing its canopy for short bursts, whereas the Recycled will fire off more canopies much quicker, which can leave you exposed if you're overrun. Like the UCB, you should aim your shots at the Griller and use the canopies to help clear up afterwards. Both of these Brellas are versatile and powerful, and I find that they generally fit into every comp, as they're able to fight strongly on their own or support teammates if they have to. The Tenta Brella can be harder to manage, due in part to its heavyweight status. It doesn't one-shot a Griller unfortunately, but it does do 360 damage per direct. However, I find in most situations this is all that's needed. Most of the time my team has already damaged the Griller or will immediately do so after I shoot it, meaning it effectively becomes a one-shot with team support. You should focus on this for most of the wave, as the Tenta has great range and shot spread. You want to be careful with overextending here just because of how punishing this weapon can feel if you run out of ink at the wrong time or you get caught up in enemy ink. Don't throw bombs or eggs. All the ink you have should be reserved for firing. The canopy helps protect you, and I would recommend not firing it off and instead using it for protective purposes against small fry if you find yourself overwhelmed by them. The canopy is huge and will almost always save you when you're against hundreds of small fry, so do yourself a favour and don't be without it. Play smart with this weapon and you'll find it to be an excellent Grilla slayer. Brushes. The brushes can feel difficult to use in Grillas because much like rollers, they struggle against quite a lot of enemies due in part to the way in which they work. They are limited in how they can attack, and 2 out of 3 of them overall feel quite weak. Therefore, in most situations, you should focus on how you can help your teammates and how you can support them. Both the ink brush and the octobrush will find the most value when playing supportively just because of their limited capabilities with the Grillas themselves. Against small fry, these 2 weapons are great, so maybe you should focus on that if you're struggling against the Grillas. Being able to mash the ZR button does help get more DPS out of both of these weapons, but you're exposed when you do so, and hey, not everybody can do this effectively. Higher platforms help, and the use of splat bombs may help you with range and damage. If all else fails, utilize the brush's good mobility, decent ink tank, and ability to support teammates. Oftentimes you'll find yourself just running eggs and repainting surfaces, but if your teammates are covering the Grillas, then this should be fine. If you need more help with stunning the Grillas, then consider specials to help give you that extra power. The paintbrush is so much stronger than its classmates and therefore should be used like other slower, powerful weapons. Create space, find a safe position to put yourself in, and focus on unloading as much damage onto the Grilla. The paintbrush's ink tank is actually quite harsh, and when you start firing, you're exposed to all the enemies surrounding you. If you struggle with this weapon, then consider knocking out the Grillas earlier just to prevent the small fry from running wild. The power of the paintbrush means that it's better served by focusing on stunning and defeating the Grillas, but it can roll over small fry and use its AoE to hit them too. I often find I use this weapon in a similar way to the Dynamo: patient, thoughtful, and careful. And again, much like other brushes, find higher platforms to help put you level with the Grillas, and consider jumping or arcing your swings to reach further away from you. Stringers. Stringers are one of the most powerful new classes of weapons introduced in Splatoon 3, and all 3 of the current weapons in the class have substantial power, range, and AoE. Like Splatanas, they have the potential to be self-sufficient and completely destroy Grillas almost single-handedly. The Reflux 450 is a valuable supportive weapon that also packs a decent punch. Much like the Dapples and the Sploosh, it's a weapon that has true flexibility with almost no downsides. Again, the range will force you to play a bit more risky, but with its power, especially with half charges, it means that you can get away with aggressive plays when you're comfortable with this weapon. It paints, it fights, it can survive, and it can support. Whatever you do with this weapon, don't forget about the damage it can inflict. Sometimes your team may be lacking DPS, so you'll be best suited to damaging the Grillas. The Tri-Stringer works much like a charger in my opinion. At full charge, it hits enemies for 450 damage, meaning it can stun them in one shot. Weapons that can stun Grillas with very little effort are powerful and should be exclusively used for this. Once stunned, you can help with damaging the Grillas and cleaning up the small fry, but you should, without a doubt, concentrate on stunning them more than anything else. The Welsh String is, in my opinion, the most powerful non-Grizzco weapon we currently have. With a fully charged shot of 600 if all 5 arrows hit the same target, and half charges and partials ranging upwards of 300, it packs an insane amount of DPS. Basically, you can solo a Grilla with this weapon. If you charge the weapon to at least half, you will deal 400 damage and then stun it. Then you can easily deal the last 1800 damage needed to fully defeat it. You should not use this weapon for anything other than beating up the Grillas. Tap shots work well against the small fry, but much like other powerful weapons, you shouldn't be focusing on these except for when you need to prioritize your safety. Chargers. The Chargers, overall as a class, will focus more on stunning the Grillas than anything else, especially the ones that can do it in one shot. Currently, there are 2 of them: the E-Liter, which deals 600 damage with 1 fully charged shot, and the Snipewriter, which is technically more than 1 shot, I know, but 1 fully charged round of 5 shots deals 1200 damage if they all hit the same target. At minimum, the Snipewriter is 240 damage per shot, so 2 of them are needed to stun it. If you are given either of these weapons, you should make stunning your absolute priority and focus only on this. I don't often recommend doing only one task, but these two weapons are two of the best weapons to have for grillers because they are able to safely stun the grillers from an impressive distance and deal substantial damage whilst at it. The drawbacks of these two weapons are obviously the slow charge times and being threatened by fast small fry, so you won't be able to get away with only concentrating on stunning if your teammates don't support you, but if they do, then you should make this your focus. You are stuck in this specific role with these weapons, but this isn't a negative thing if you can manage yourself well with them. For the rest of the class, you will want to focus on stunning as your main priority, but you won't be able to stun in one shot, so it's good to get some practice if you feel like you'll struggle with this. Ideally, your teammates will lead the exposed tail of the griller towards you, but sometimes you won't have much time to do this. Often, especially with charges that deal 300 damage on a fully charged shot, such as GooTuber, Splat Charger and Swiffer, I tend to hit a fully charged shot early so that I have more safety to fully charge another shot, or I'm able to utilise tap shots, or my teammates can easily assist with the extra 100 damage needed to stun. GooTuber can add surprising DPS with its tap shots up close, and the other two have piercing, so can hit small fry in addition to the grillers. The main bit of advice I can give you for chargers as an overall class is that you can't stay in one position for the entire wave unless you are extremely effective with this weapon. It's not easy to be self-sufficient, but it is possible. Understanding map layouts, how the grillers and the small fry work, and how to play in conjunction with your team will all help you refine your skills with chargers, but this isn't easy and does definitely need practice. In addition, it varies quite a lot by the weapons themselves because some of them have more stunning power, but others have faster fire and better mobility, so you'll often find you need to flex a bit more. Regardless, you are vulnerable with them, so as long as you recognise where your vulnerabilities are, you can work on potentially protecting yourself or trying to make the benefits of the weapon outweigh the negatives. The Bamboozler is in a bit of a weird spot, but I find if I use it more like a shooter, then I get a bit more value out of it. What I mean by this is that it is incredibly fast, has a really good ink tank, and aside from its poor paint, can be really useful in terms of stunning from safety and applying damage. It does struggle slightly against small fry due to its lack of AoE, lack of piercing, and extremely small hitbox, so you want to be careful with these, but aside from them, I find it quite fun to play grillers with. It's only 3 fully charged shots to stun, and you charge and fire shots so quickly with this weapon, which makes it really effective at stunning. In addition, its range allows you to back off or take safer stances, especially if you have to relocate because of small fry. All charges give you the potential to play either very aggressively or very defensively, and I think it's important to mimic the speed at which your teammates want to play at. What I mean by this is that yes, you can stun grillers earlier if you need to, but if your teammates don't support you and help you defeat the grillers and then run the eggs, you won't be able to do this by yourself, often limited by slow recharge times and poor ink efficiency. It may take a few spawns to recognise how your team can support you. I try to play more safely when I have a charger, and so I tend to stun earlier, especially the first few, just so that I can ensure the quota starts being met, potentially before more enemies are on the screen. However, this often depends on whether my team also play this way, so it's important to recognise if you may be stunning too early for them, or if they think everything just needs to be at the basket before being destroyed. Use caution because as a charger, you are vulnerable, especially to the small fry. Don't use bombs, you often don't see value in them, and you are usually better off using the power and the range of the actual charger. Use specials if you're unable to stun the grillers. This will happen if your teammates aren't supporting you, or if you're constantly aggroed, which unfortunately does make it harder to aim at them. The best way to support chargers on your team is to ensure that their feet are always painted, that the small fry going for them are managed, and that you always try to lead the exposed tail of the griller to them for them to easily shoot at. Having a charger on your team for grillers is a godsend in a lot of ways, and I appreciate that some people find it really hard to maximize these weapons given their high skill ceilings and limitations, so do your best to make the lives of charger players easier and support them any way you can. If your charger player gets taken down, then you may be stuck without a weapon that can stun a griller very easily. This is often the beginning of the end for a griller's wave, so please do help a charger player if they look like they're struggling. Grizzco Weapons. The Grizzco Weapons as a whole are a subgenre of weapons inspired by their respective classes, but usually with overpowered mechanics. I will speak about the Slosher and the Splatana in a separate point as their usage varies dramatically from every other weapon, but for this section I'll touch briefly on what each Grizzco weapon can add when you're given them. For every single Grizzco weapon, you shouldn't really use flat bombs as the effects of the weapons themselves are superior 99% of the time. The Grizzco Charger is arguably the best of the bunch for a lot of reasons, but I think the main reason is the speed of which it charges, its range, and its decent ink tank. At 200 damage per shot, it isn't especially powerful, but it charges faster than all other chargers and has more range than all of them, giving you an exceptional ability to stun with speed almost unmatched by any other weapon in the game. For Grillers, your priority is stunning, which will take 2 shots. After this, you should help with overall DPS. On a full ink tank, you have 7 shots, meaning you can unload 1400 damage really quickly into the Grillers, and this should be enough for your team to take care of the rest. My advice, however, is that you shouldn't always empty your ink tank, especially if you don't have small fry support or paint to move through. I often count the shots in my head when I'm firing. After 5 or 6 of them, I tend to recover ink. Given the range you have, you should recognize when stunning early benefits you and your team. You will often be the best player for this, and it's important you prioritize your ability to control the flow of incoming Grillers. Don't overlure if you feel like it may be unsafe, and don't overextend for eggs if your team is already doing that. You can afford to hang back with this weapon. The Grizzco Stringer has impressive damage but isn't really intuitive or easy to use. It has the ability to deal 1350 damage with 1 fully charged shot, but because it has 9 reticules, it can make it hard to aim. This forces you to be closer, as it's much easier to inflict that DPS into an enemy that's closer to you. When you jump, you switch from horizontal aiming to vertical aiming, which can actually help with stunning. Like regular stringers, you have the ability to arc your shots upwards and over obstacles. This is doable with the Grizzco variant, but it is harder. There is a hell of a lot of tech with this weapon. I do have a guide on it, it's linked in the description, so I won't go into too much depth here. But it's important to note that this weapon can be used in lots of different ways, but does require practice before you find yourself comfortable with it. You'll likely take the same position as chargers, splatlings, and stringers, and you should ensure that you've always got paint to stand in to recover ink whenever possible. Given the high ink usage each fully charged shot deals, you'll find yourself out of ink quickly if you spam shots. This is also the same for tap shots and partials. You should use platforms to your advantage and don't neglect your range with this. You can stun the Griller even if some of your aiming is off. As long as 3 reticules hit the exposed tail and you fully charge this weapon, it does stun it. You are better at damaging rather than stunning. I would prioritize fully charged up close shots for 1350 damage once the Griller has been stunned. You effectively half the damage your team need to do, which is quite incredible really. If you're on your own, you can 2-shot a Griller with quite a lot of ease. It is a lot easier to inflict damage on a stunned Griller as there are more hitboxes available to you. You can also make use of the explosive bolts left in the ground to help with small fry and arcing shots. However, I would do this just for survival if needed, as I think the strength of the Grizzco Stringer lies in its incredible DPS. The Grizzco Blaster and Grizzco Brella function in very similar ways. They are both weapons with the ability to spam fire quickly and hit multiple things at once. The Blaster has a poorer ink tank but a better AoE spread in terms of hitting small fry more consistently, but the Brella has more shots in its tank and has probably the best paint of all Grizzco weapons. The range of both is moderate and their ability to stun a Griller is okay. I often find these Grizzco weapons are better with support rather than slaying, but given their ability to spam shots, I think it's also fine to take Slayer rolls with them. You just need to be conscious of the fact that it requires more shots and more time to stun. Once stunned, the Grillers are really easy for both of these weapons to inflict damage on whilst also managing small fry. Because of this, I often play them rather aggressively and go very close to the Grillers themselves. This is because I want to ensure that I get any small fry that comes out of them, and to make sure that I hit the directs on the Griller for as much damage as possible. The indirects or AoE can then provide damage for the small fry. These Grizzco weapons, when paired with stronger Grizzco weapons, work really well because they can provide that much needed mobility, paint and support. You will often find you are the best weapon to run eggs, to help support with paint and to help support with surplus damage. You should remain mobile, fluid and be ready to adapt if needed. I really enjoy playing Grillers with both of these weapons because I personally prefer to have a bit more fluidity and freedom in my movement and positioning rather than anything super strict. You can ensure you start inflicting damage early on the Grillers to help with stunning, or you can focus more on the small fry and protecting your teammates. Whatever Whatever you choose to do with these two, just don't forget that you have the best supported Grizzco weapons with these, and that a lot of the time you will be helping your teammates and reaching objective rather than doing anything extraordinary. Bombs can be used with these weapons, and I often find that egg throwing isn't terribly ink heavy, given that they both recover ink with good speed. However, I really wouldn't rely on bombs because the AoE of both of these weapons can do way more than bombs can without using 70% of your ink tank. The Grizzco roller is unique in the sense that its rolling mechanism is how it deals substantial damage. The problem during grillers is that rollers tend to struggle because the griller itself isn't something you can roll over. We've already spoken about this in the rollers section, and all the same limitations apply to the Grizzco roller. Unfortunately, it is kind of walled by grillers as a mode. Your fast 400 rolling damage doesn't really help you in this mode, so what you're left with is either flicking the grillers or crushing small fry. Certainly being on small fry duty is really effective, and I'd recommend this if your teammates are effectively managing the grillers without needing help. There needs to be someone managing small fry, and rollers are the best weapon for it most of the time. Also, you're really quick when running, not throwing golden eggs. In regard to its flick, the Grizzco roller's horizontal flick isn't great, primarily because you have to be very close to the target. The range is unfortunately quite short, and it only has a maximum damage of 150. To be honest with you, the horizontal flicks are practically useless during this wave. So the best way to use the Grizzco roller during grillers is to vertically flick with it. However, you need to be safe to do this as it is slow and leaves you very exposed. The vertical flick deals 600 damage, which can one-shot stun a griller. Even with fall off, the minimum is 400, meaning that as long as you hit the exposed tail, it will always stun in one flick. Its range is insane, quite frankly, so you can vertically flick the exposed tail from some really safe positions. The vertical flick takes 72 frames, which is just over a second. After attacking, there is a 75 frame cooldown before ink can start refilling. I mention all of this just to get across the point how slow the Grizzco roller is when vertically flicking, so you really need to make sure you have the space and ink to do this. The Grizzco Dualies have explosive, far-reaching dodge rolls, which is great in most waves, but in grillers you may find you can't utilise these without risking your safety. Instead, I tend to use their actual firing, which is powerful, ink efficient, and very effective at unloading damage onto the grillers. Like the regular Splat Dualies, they have a base damage of 30 per shot, with their fire rate getting buffed after dodge rolling, going from 5 frames per shot to 4 frames per shot. The ink tank on this thing feels endless. You can shoot for so long with this weapon, and I often find that is where its strength is. When dodge rolling, you will damage everything nearby for 125 damage. Minimum is 40, which is the health of a small fry. These are absolutely great at supporting the team with things like turfing, reviving, and AoE damage being really easy. The Grizzco Dualies may find that it has overlapping roles with other supportive Grizzco weapons like the Blaster and the Brella, so if you find you are in company with these, you may want to concentrate more on slaying rather than supporting. The excellent thing about the Grizzco Dualies is that it is so versatile with the stats to back up being a slayer but also being supportive. Piercing weapons. The Grizzco Splatana and the Grizzco Sloshers are the only two weapons in the game currently that can pierce through the griller's armour. This bypasses the major restriction of not being able to inflict damage on the enemy until its weak spot is exposed. For both of these weapons, this is not an issue. They simply pierce through the outer armour and damage it. They both work a bit differently, and given their uniqueness, I'll explain how to get the most out of both of them. They are both, for lack of a better term, absolutely broken. I have guides specifically for both of these weapons, I'll link them down below, and I talk about their ability to destroy grillers in more depth in both of those videos, so I'd recommend watching them. For both of these weapons, you need support, and so if you find a teammate has either of these weapons, you should do your best to keep them active and try not to steal their thunder. Protect them, paint for them, run the eggs they provide, and keep small fry under control. The Grizzco Slosher is the original griller slayer weapon. It's been in the game since Splatoon 2, and so how to use it and how to maximise it is a bit more widely understood. With 4 Sloshers per full ink tank, it deals 360 damage on contact. However, what makes it so special is that it pierces through absolutely everything in the game and will hit enemies multiple times with one shot. So, when you aim at a griller, you will inflict damage on 2 hitboxes with 1 slosh, which causes 720 damage and immediately stuns it. Given its slowness and harsh ink tank, you should incorporate some space between you and the griller. You'll notice that it won't stun immediately, but rather after a second or so. Standing too close to the griller, especially if it is aggro to you, may see you get taken out before it's stunned in place. The good thing, however, is that having the griller aggro to the Grizzco Slosher is good because then you can line up the griller so that you can effectively use your shots, rather than potentially missing or hitting it once indirectly, which sometimes does happen when your teammates are aggroed and running around. Once it's stunned, depending on your teammates, you can choose to recover ink or to fire more shots. The important recommendation with the Grizzco Slosher is that you should never overspend your ink tank, and you should always be in a position where you can recover ink quickly and safely. I tend to fire 3 shots, then look to recover ink. 3 shots is 1080 damage, which is just under half the total health for the griller. You will struggle against the speed at which the small fry move, so it's important to always have the ability to fire a shot off and then relocate to stay safe. You should have the time to fire 3 shots, recover ink, and then fire more before it starts moving again, but this is if your teammates aren't helping you. Once it's stunned, generally speaking, you should find that your teammates will finish it off. I often tell you that you should be flexible in Freelance, but it's really hard to do this with the Grizzco Slosher, and it remains one of the only weapons with exceptionally limited function in the game. You are a slayer and nothing else. However, you can use this to make the game really safe and passable, or use this to push the boundaries on egg totals. The Grizzco Slosher allows you to have great speed at stunning and defeating grillers, so if you find you are struggling, then you may find that being more aggressive with incoming spawns will help. In addition, given the pathing of the slosh, its overall range and its ability to arc, you can use higher platforms or aim your shots higher to ensure that the end of it hits your intended target. It does take some work to get proficient with it, but I think the best way to do this is to completely immerse yourself in the role of slaying. Doing anything else is an utter waste of your time and will see you being really ineffective. Getting the Grizzco Slosher for grillers is the game giving you a win con or a free pass. Don't waste it. The Grizzco Splatana is different to the Grizzco Slosher in the sense that it can destroy the entire thing in one charge slash. So whilst it does have the same principles in that it pierces through and hits multiple hitboxes, it is also considered stronger because of its higher damage output per full ink tank. One fully charged slash deals 1200 damage. However, because it pierces, it hits several hitboxes and they all get hit for 1200 damage, so it gets taken out immediately. You don't need to aim for the exposed tail. You can hit anywhere on its upper body, the black grill, to inflict the damage. The green outer armor can be pierced through, but the hitboxes of the griller are in the top of it. The downside to the weapon is that the range is objectively poor. It is likely the shortest range weapon in the game, and the time it takes to charge the weapon, 78 frames, makes you slow and vulnerable. You're basically immobile once you charge a shot, so you'll need to learn how to time your charges and the release of the charge with the grillers being very close to you. This, of course, puts you at risk of the grillers, but also the small fry. A good thing about the Grizzco Splatana is that it isn't terrible against small fry. Its tap slashes are really effective and it hits multiple at once, but you don't want to focus on this. No other weapon in the game at the time of making this video performs the way that this weapon does, and you can argue that it is better than the Grizzco Slosher because you need far less ink for more damage. So how do you use this weapon given its obvious downsides? The first thing is to prioritize slaying the griller. You shouldn't really do anything else unless you are running eggs when there are no grillers around you. Again, much like the Grizzco Slosher, you should focus on slaying and slaying only. The second thing is to figure out the best position on the map to stand and charge your weapon. This does vary map by map, with some being better than others, but all maps have platforms or ledges that can ensure safety from small fry and give you time to charge a shot. This also depends on who has the aggro and where it is being led to. Arguably, it's easier to have the aggro on yourself so that you can ensure you are charged and close enough to the griller, but often if it isn't aggro to you, you'll need to chase the grillers and meet them at a position where you can immediately hit them. Given that you have the ability to also lunge, you can find yourself missing the griller entirely, only hitting one hitbox or going straight into the water. This weapon takes a bit of practice and it needs cooperation from your team. Sometimes you'll have a team who couldn't care less about the ability to one-shot a griller and will not help you achieve this. If that's the case, then just play it safe and follow their lead. You have power, but you don't need to die trying to one-shot it. The tap slashes on the Grizzco Splatana are also rather powerful. I wouldn't recommend repeatedly attempting to one-shot them and being taken out. This often means your teammates will panic. Much like the Grizzco Slosher, you can play it safe or you can play it with with a high risk, high reward. It takes practice and it takes understanding of your team and also the maps that you're on. Thank you for watching part 1 in this series about how to deal with Brellas in SalmonRun in Splatoon 3. Originally this was going to be a 2-part series, but after doing this video I feel like I need to split it into 3. In the second video I'll be discussing Brellas on all the different maps we currently have in the game, and then I'll talk about specials too and how to get the most out of them. In the third and final part I will be discussing strats, quota, surviving, things of that nature. More opinion based, but how to survive really. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.